Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you today about power of sales. You've probably noticed there's more and more power of sales coming on the marketplace. I'm seeing more come across my desk, and there's a reason for it. And it's really the economic climate that we're living in right now. You all remember the boom of the COVID era, 2020 to 2022. The market was hectic, prices were going up daily, there was multiple offers, and so on. And then starting in really April of 2022, the market started to slide and prices have dropped ever since. At the same time, when COVID was in full roar, interest rates were at a record low. They've been inching up as well. So we've got a problem this year and coming into next year. Anybody who bought a house in, let's say, 2021 and put a 5-year mortgage on it are seeing their mortgage come up for renewal this year. And on into next year, there's going to be more mortgages coming up. And as these mortgages come up for renewal, the owners have a bit of a challenge. First of all, because the interest rates are double what they were, so the carrying costs are going to be double. And secondly, they can't shop around and take the mortgage somewhere else because it won't appraise. The value of the property is less in many cases than what's owing against it. So if a person runs into a problem maintaining their mortgage, they're starting to fall behind. Under normal circumstances, they would have equity in the property and they'd put the property on the market for sale. And certainly some of them do. But in a lot of cases, they can't do that because there's either no equity in the property or there's so little equity in the property, it won't cover the closing costs, the legal fees, the commissions, and so on. So they have no choice at all but to have the bank take it over and sell it power of sale. So we're starting to see that happen, but it's not as out of control as you might think yet. We call a mortgage is delinquent if it's more than 90 days in arrears. And in actual fact, the delinquent mortgages across the country right now are just less than 1/4 of 1%, 0.24% across the country. So it's very, very low, but it is increasing. But if you go and take a look at mortgages that are in arrears, they're not 3 months behind yet, but people are falling behind. And they may be a month, month and a half. Maybe they're paying part of the mortgage and not all of it. It's 10%, and that's rising. So there's a lot of people struggling. Now, they shouldn't be, because we, back then and still today, have the stress test. And the stress test was designed to allow people to still qualify as mortgage rates rose. The problem, of course, is that people qualified under the stress test with a higher rate, but they had some wiggle room and they went out and bought furniture, bought cars, added extra debt because they felt they could afford it. And then when their mortgage come up for renewal, they're in a problem. Or they find that they really couldn't handle the debt that they thought they could. And so we run into this problem. Now, we use the term power of sale and we use the term foreclosure, and we use them almost interchangeably, and they're not. One of the things is, depending on the jurisdiction, which province you're in, one is more prevalent than another. Power of sale is not really used in certain provinces. It's heavily used in Ontario. Some other provinces, it's strictly foreclosure. And I want to take a minute and make sure you understand the difference between power of sale and foreclosure. Under foreclosure, you take action after continual default of, as I said, at least 3 months. And then you issue a notice of default demanding payment in full. Now, the lender files a foreclosure petition to the court. He has to get the court involved at this point, and the judge issues what's called a notice to borrower demanding repayment in full. And when saying demanding repayment in full, he demands the principal be paid, any arrears and interest being paid, legal fees being paid, taxes being paid. But the other thing is, the judge normally under foreclosure gives the borrower 6 months to bring it back into good standing. Well, if he hasn't maintained his mortgage, he's already in default 3 months, the chances are very, very slim that he's going to be able to bring it up to good standing in that 6-month period. But meanwhile, the clock's continuing to tick, but so's the meter. And so he's going to owe 6 months more of interest, 6 months more of taxes and other expenses and so on. So he gets to the point, at least 6 months after the judge has issued the order, that the judge then contacts the land titles office and instructs them to transfer the title from the borrower to the lender. So at this point, the property is owned by the lender. Very significant difference there. Now, what's the result of this? The result is that if the property eventually sells for less than the debt, the lender can't go back to the borrower for the shortfall. He owns the property, and so the debt is washed away as far as the borrower is concerned. But if there's surplus in the property and it sells for more, he doesn't owe the borrower anything. He keeps the windfall. So the transfer of title makes a transfer of debt at the same time. Very, very significant difference. What are the advantages and disadvantages of foreclosure? Well, one of the disadvantages is very slow. We talked about the fact that the judge normally gives 6 months. That's after 3 months of default. It can probably take up to a year under foreclosure. It involves the court from the get-go, right from the first process. It's very expensive. But on the other side, the lender has a chance to making a windfall. If there's a lot more equity in the property than the debt, he's going to inherit that equity. And so it can be very, very good for the lender, but generally speaking, the borrower is going to somehow sell that property if there's a lot of equity. And so we don't see foreclosure being an opportunity to make a lot of money, but it can. All right, that's one of the advantages. Now let's look at power of sale. Power of sale, you don't need the court's consent to initiate the power of sale. What you do is you can take action after continuous default, and generally lenders do about the same thing. 2 or 3 months of default, they send a demand letter telling the borrower that he has to pay up a certain amount of money, and then they give him a notice of sale under the mortgage. Once they've issued that notice of sale under the mortgage to the borrower, he's normally got somewhere around 35 days to bring it into good standing, failing which the lender can initiate action, ask the court to sign off on a change of possession. Now, not change of ownership, change of possession. And the courts can give him a notice of possession and can essentially evict the tenant or the lender, and the borrower is free to put the property on the market to begin to sell it. The impact is different than foreclosure. Under power of sale, the lender has got to do his best to try and get the most money he can, because any surplus goes to the borrower. Any shortfall, the borrower is still on the hook to the lender. So it doesn't cancel out the debt. It just takes us a giant step toward mitigating those expenses that the mortgage has incurred. The advantage, of course, is it's a lot quicker. It's a lot quicker under power of sale than it is under foreclosure. It's less costly under power of sale than it is under foreclosure. It doesn't involve the courts to initiate the process. The power of sale is built right into the mortgage document. It allows you to do it. No potential for a windfall from the lender, but he's got a responsibility to the borrower, and he's got to be careful of what we call an improvidential sale. Now, I want to take a minute or two and talk about an improvidential sale. Basically, as I said, the lender has a responsibility to try and get the most money he can for the borrower. If it seems that he didn't, let's suppose that the amount owing is around $500,000, but the equity in the property is about $600,000, and the lender accepts an offer for $530,000, $540,000 to get it cleared off. It's going to cover his debt. It's going to cover the expenses. It's going to cover the commission, and he doesn't care. He fire sales it off. The courts will frown on that because they'll say you were cavalier in your attitude and your approach to the borrower and to his equity, and they can call that an improvidential sale. And it means that you failed to adequately market the property, or you rushed the sale, or the sale was not arm's length. We had a situation some years ago where an agent was listing a property power of sale, and he had an investor friend he thought was just the absolute right fit for this property. And so he listed it exclusively, brought his investor friend in, got an offer, got it accepted. Well, sometime before closing, The bank came to the realization that it was never listed MLS. They were extremely concerned about the danger of an improvidential sale. Fortunately, the agent had a good enough relationship with the investor buyer. He got the buyer to back off, put the property back in the market. This time, MLS made sure there was full exposure in the marketplace and ultimately sold it. See, the courts can award the borrower the difference between the sale price and fair market value, and the lender has to, out of his own pocket, pay that up to the borrower. So they're very, very concerned about an improvidential sale. Sometimes, they are a little bit frivolous about the way they handle it. Years and years ago, when I had a power of sale back when interest rates were very, very high, I remember getting an offer and sending it into the bank. And this was back when bank managers basically made the decisions, and they signed it back. And the bank manager called me and he said, disregard the sign back, just sign it back again at the offer that you came in at and we'll accept it. We're just trying to create a paper trail. What they were trying to do is show that we tried to get more money and we just couldn't. So that's the balancing act under power of sale on part of the lender to make sure it's not an improvidential sale. Now, are there any shortfalls or dangers to buying a property under power of sale? A lot of people want to buy power of sale because they figure it's an opportunity to get a deal. Well, there are some concerns that you need to be aware of as an agent representing a buyer. One is that they're going to be buying the property as is. The lender will have his own either full offer or schedule at once attached to it, and it'll say, we are making no disclosure whatsoever as to whether the property ever had urea formaldehyde, as if it was ever used as a grow-up. We don't have any information about the history of the property, whether the furnace is working, whether the air conditioning is working, and the buyer agrees to buy it as is. The other thing is there may be missing or damaged chattels. I had a friend years and years ago, a successful businessman. He had retail stores and ran a wonderful business. He had this huge house just outside of town, and he was losing it all because he had a credit line for his businesses, and it was running 22%. Couldn't possibly maintain it. So I put the property up on the market, and it was huge. And the living room, dining room was one room, and it was visually divided by this huge piece of furniture that would never fit into a regular house. It was a custom-made piece of furniture that was like a china cabinet buffet. And I remember after the deal sold, before it closed, he made arrangements to take this great piece of furniture out of there. Not that he had a use for it, but he just felt like, I'm losing this house, why would I give this up as well? And you'll have properties being sold under power of sale and all the equipment for the pool being gone, maybe the light fixtures are gone, maybe the dishwasher's gone. And you can understand the person who's losing it all feels like, well, I'm not going to leave these things behind if I don't have to. And so the person buying it has got no guarantee that these chattels that would normally be left are going to be left. But the biggest thing is the right of redemption. We saw under foreclosure that the title of the property was transferred from the borrower to the lender. He physically owned the property. Not so under power of sale. Under power of sale, the courts are generally concerned about the rights of the consumer, and they allow the borrower to redeem the property right up until closing. So if you are buying or selling to a client a property under power of sale, it'll say right in there, this is subject to the borrower not exercising his right of redemption. Your buyer can be pulling into the driveway almost with a moving truck and find out that at the very, very last minute, the borrower redeemed the property and it makes the sale null and void. So that's one of the things that's of a concern. The other thing is that this whole issue of occupancy, vacant possession, the bank or lender isn't going to go through the steps with the landlord and tenant board if there was a tenant to make sure they're evicted, or if the owner has stayed on and has now become a tenant. The buyer is going to inherit that person and that problem. And then finally, there's the issue of any encumbrances. We know that power of sale removes any subsequent encumbrances, but previous encumbrances it does not. So there may be some liens, there may be some claims, there may be some debts against the property, and they can be cleared up, but you need to deal with a lawyer that knows what they're doing when they're dealing with power of sale. So there's some issues that we want to watch for. You want to keep these in mind because we're going to see more and more power of sales over the next 12 to 24 months. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. Talk to you again next week.